Ollie had always been fascinated by the supernatural. He loved watching horror movies and reading books about ghosts and demons. So when he heard about the abandoned house on the outskirts of town that was rumored to be haunted, he knew that he had to check it out. It was a dark and stormy night when Ollie got into his car and drove out to the old house. The streets were deserted, and the only sound he could hear was the rain pounding against the windshield. As he drove, he could feel a sense of unease growing inside him. He had heard stories about the house before, about the strange noises that could be heard coming from inside, and the shadowy figures that were said to lurk in the darkness, but he was determined to see for himself. He pulled up in front of the house and parked the car, taking a deep breath before getting out and walking towards the creaky old door. The door creaked open with a loud groan, and Ollie stepped inside. The air was musty and stale, and the only light came from the moon, which filtered weakly through the dirty windows. As he made his way through the house, Ollie's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel a sense of foreboding growing inside him, as though he was being watched by something dark and malevolent. He rounded a corner and entered a room that seemed to be in better condition than the rest of the house. But as he looked around, his eyes were drawn to the far corner of the room, where something was moving in the darkness. Ollie squinted, trying to make out what it was. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, but then he saw it, a shadowy figure, lurking in the corner, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity. He watched in horror as the figure began to move towards him, its movements jerky and unnatural. Ollie knew he should run, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. The figure was getting closer now, and Ollie could see that its skin was gray and mottled, like that of a corpse. Its eyes were sunken and its mouth hung open, revealing sharp, pointed teeth. Ollie tried to scream, but no sound came out. He was frozen with fear as the figure reached out a hand towards him, its fingers like bony claws, and then everything went black. When Ollie regained consciousness, he was lying on the floor of the abandoned house, his heart racing. He could feel a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead, and his hands were shaking. He looked around, trying to get his bearings, but the room was spinning. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw the shadowy figure looming over him, its eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. Ollie tried to crawl away, but the figure moved with lightning speed, grabbing him by the ankle and pulling him back towards it. He could feel its cold, clammy skin against his own, and he knew that he was in grave danger. "Who are you?" he managed to croak, his voice barely audible above the sound of his own breathing. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised its other hand and pointed towards the far corner of the room. Ollie followed its gaze and saw a woman dressed in white, standing in the shadows. He couldn't make out her face, but he could feel the power emanating from her. It was as if she was controlling the shadowy figure with just a thought. As she stepped forward, Ollie could see that her eyes were glowing with an otherworldly energy, and he knew that he was in the presence of something far more powerful than he could ever imagine. He tried to crawl away, but the shadowy figure held him fast. The woman in white approached him, and he could feel her power coursing through his veins. He knew that he was in grave danger, that he was no match for the supernatural forces at work in the abandoned house. As he looked into the woman's eyes, he could feel himself slipping further and further into the darkness, and then everything went black again. When Ollie woke up again, he was in a different room of the abandoned house. It was even darker than before, and he could barely see anything, but as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw that he wasn't alone. There were other figures in the room with him, shadowy and indistinct. He tried to move, but he found that he was bound, his hands and feet tied with thick ropes. He struggled against his bonds, but it was no use. As he looked around, he realized that he was surrounded by the undead. They were like the figure he had encountered earlier, with gray, mottled skin and glowing eyes that he could feel their cold breath on his skin, and he knew that he was in grave danger. Suddenly, the woman in white appeared before him. She was more powerful than ever, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly energy. She told him that he was now one of them, that he would serve her forever. Ollie tried to resist, but it was no use. He could feel her power coursing through his veins, and he knew that he was now part of her army of the undead, that he was a prisoner of the darkness, forever bound to serve the woman in white and her army of the undead. And as the mist closed in around him, Ollie knew that he would never be free again. Ollie's friends and family never saw him again. They searched for him for weeks, but there was no trace of him anywhere. Some said that he had run away, unable to deal with the stress of everyday life. Others whispered that he had been taken by the supernatural forces that he had been so fascinated with, but the truth was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Ollie had been consumed by the darkness, transformed into a creature of the night, forever bound to serve the woman in white and her army of the undead. As the years went by, rumors began to circulate about a group of shadowy figures that roamed the streets at night, searching for new recruits to add to their army of the undead. Some said that they were led by a woman dressed in white, with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly energy, and whenever anyone mentioned the abandoned house on the outskirts of town, they would shiver in fear, knowing that the darkness still lurked there, waiting to claim its next victim. For Ollie, there was no escape from the horror that had claimed him. He was lost to the darkness forever, a prisoner of the woman in white and her army of the undead. And as the years went by, his memory faded into legend, a cautionary tale of the dangers that lurk in the darkness, waiting to claim the unwary and the unsuspecting. At the end of this video, thank you for listening. If you like the story, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. This increases our encouragement to receive all new and interesting stories from the world of ghosts and mysterious powers.